Chapter 6 of The Missing Chums by Franklin W. Dixon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Missing. No word came from Chet Morton or Biff Hooper the following day. Although the parents of the Chums tried to allay their fears by assuming that the lads had not stopped off at Hawk Cove after all, or had neglected to write, as is the way of boys the world over, when 3 days passed without further news, the situation became serious. "They were wrecked in that storm, I know it," declared Iola Morton with conviction when the Hardy boys called at the farmhouse on the third day. "Mother is almost frantic, and Daddy doesn't know what to do. It isn't like Chet to make us wait this long for some word of where he is, particularly when he knew we'd be anxious." "The Hoopers are terribly worried about Biff," Joe put in. "We went over there last night to see if they had heard anything. Mr. Hooper had telephoned to nearly all the fishing villages up the coast, but none of them had seen anything of the boat." Iola turned pale. "They hadn't seen the boat at all?" Frank shook his head. "Either the boys were wrecked or they were swept out to sea," said the girl. She turned away and dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. She was on the verge of breaking down. "Oh, can't something be done to find trace of them?" "It's time we were getting busy," Frank agreed. "I think we'd better organize a searching party." "With the motorboats?" asked Joe. "Yes, we can take our boat. Perhaps Tony Preto will be able to come along with the Napoli, and we'll get the rest of the fellows. We can cruise along the bay and up the coast, and perhaps we'll find some trace." "Will you do that?" asked Iola, brightening up. "Oh, if you only will! At least we'll know that someone is searching for them." "I've been thinking that possibly their boat got wrecked and they were washed up on an island or on some part of the coast a long way from any village," Frank observed. "I don't think they've been drowned. They are both good swimmers, and it would take a lot to kill either of them." "Well, if we're going to go, we may as well get started." "All right, Joe, we'll take some grub with us and count on staying until we find some trace of them, perhaps 2 or 3 days." A sudden thought struck Joe. "How about Mother?" Frank whistled. "Gosh, I'd forgotten. Perhaps she can get someone to stay with her. Seeing it isn't a pleasure trip we're going on, she might let us go." "Oh, I hope she does," exclaimed Iola. "As long as we know you boys are out searching for Chet and Biff, we'll be a lot easier in our minds." "Well, let's go back and see what arrangements we can make," Frank said briskly. "The sooner we get away, the better." The lads mounted their motorcycles and turned toward the city. The idea of organizing a searching party for the missing Chums had occurred to Frank previously, but he had been waiting, hoping against hope that some word might be received regarding the 2 boys. The fact that Mrs. Hardy would be left alone at home had been the one circumstance that had prevented him from starting out in search of the Chums before this, but now the situation seemed to warrant action at all costs. "If Mother is afraid to stay at home alone, I guess the trip is off," he said to Joe. "But when she knows how serious it is, I don't think she'll mind." "I don't like to leave her alone myself," replied Joe, "but someone has to organize a searching party. I've been more worried about Chet and Biff than I'd like to admit." "Me too." When the boys returned home, they found Mrs. Hardy opening the morning mail. She had a letter in her hand, and as they entered the living room, she glanced up with a smile of pleasure. "We're going to have a visitor." "Who?" "Your Aunt Gertrude." Frank glanced at his brother. Well did they know their Aunt Gertrude. She was a maiden lady of middle age who spent the greater part of her life in a sort of grand circuit series of visits to all her relatives far and near. Aunt Gertrude had no fixed place of abode. Accompanied by numerous trunks, satchels, and a lazy yellow cat by the name of Lavinia, she was apt to drop in at any time in the course of a year, brusquely announcing her intention of remaining for an indefinite stay. Then she would install herself in the guest room and proceed to manage the household until the hour of her departure. Aunt Gertrude was formidable. Her word was law, and because she was possessed of a small fortune and a sharp tongue, none dared offend her. Relatives had discovered that the best plan was to suffer her visits in silence and pray for her speedy departure. Now she was coming to visit the Hardys. "Aunt Gertrude is coming? Isn't that great?" exclaimed Joe. Mrs. Hardy looked at her son suspiciously. The Hardy boys had never been known to evince much enthusiasm over Aunt Gertrude's visits before. The worthy lady had a habit of regarding them as though they were still in swaddling clothes, and she invariably showed a tendency to dictate as to their food, their hours of rising and going to bed, their companions, and their choice of literature. Many a Sunday afternoon she had thrust on them a weighty volume of Pilgrim's Progress and sat guard over them as they miserably strove to pretend an interest in the allegorical adventures of Bunyan's hero. "I didn't think you cared for Aunt Gertrude," ventured Mrs. Hardy, when she saw that both Frank and Joe were beaming with satisfaction. "When will she be here?" "This afternoon, according to her letter. She never gives one a great deal of notice." "She couldn't have come at a better time. For once in her life, Aunt Gertrude will be useful," Frank declared, and with that he told his mother of their desire to organize a searching party for the missing chums. Mrs. Hardy had been deeply concerned over Chet and Biff since their departure from Bayport, and now she agreed that a search should indeed be conducted. "And now that Aunt Gertrude is coming, you won't be afraid to stay here alone," Joe pointed out. Mrs. Hardy smiled. "And you'll leave me here all alone to the mercies of that managing woman?" "There's not much use having us all here. Aunt Gertrude will run things anyway, whether there's 3 of us or 100. "Yes, I suppose so. Well, I shan't be afraid to stay here as long as Aunt Gertrude is in the house. I imagine any burglar would rather deal with a vicious bulldog. Go ahead on your trip. When do you intend to start?" "As soon as we can see Tony Preto and the rest of the boys. We want to make a real searching party of it. By the way, when will Aunt Gertrude arrive?" "On the 4 o'clock train, I expect." "Then we'll leave here about 3 o'clock," declared Frank, with a grin, for the boys' dislike of their tyrannical aunt was no secret in the Hardy household. Mrs. Hardy smiled reprovingly, and the lads hustled away in search of Tony and the other boys. Tony Preto was afire with enthusiasm when they broached the subject to him. A few words with Mr. Preto, and he obtained permission to have use of the Napoli for as long as would be necessary. "We'll start out as soon as we can get ready," Frank told him. "See if you can get Jerry and Phil to go with you, and we'll go look up Perry Robinson. Perhaps he'll come along with us. We don't want to lose any time." Perry Robinson, more familiarly known as Slim, readily agreed to accompany the boys on the search. "You bet I'll go," he declared. "When do we start?" 3 o'clock, if we can be ready by then. Meet us at the boathouse and bring along some grub." "I'll be there," promised Slim. The Hardy boys carried blankets and a small tent down to the boat and stowed them away. Then came cooking utensils and a supply of food sufficient to last them for several days. They would, of course, be able to get supplies at the fishing villages along the coast, but as they had no idea where their search would lead them, they were determined to take no chances. "Thank goodness we'll be away from here before Aunt Gertrude arrives," chuckled Frank, as the boys were putting on their outing clothes at 2 o'clock that afternoon. "She'll be madder than a wet hen when she finds we've escaped her. If there's anything she likes better than bossing us around and showing us our faults, I don't know what it is." Alas for the best-laid plans. Aunt Gertrude must have had some premonition of the truth. She advanced the time of her arrival by a good 2 hours. The 2 o'clock train brought her to Bayport, bags, baggage, and Lavinia, the cat. The boys were first apprised of her advent when they heard a taxicab pull up in front of the house. Joe peeped out the window of their room. "Sweet spirits of niter! Aunt Gertrude herself!" "No." "Yes." "Let me see." Frank rushed to the window in time to see Aunt Gertrude, attired in a voluminous garment of fashion dating back at least a decade, laboriously emerging from the taxicab. She was a large woman with a strident voice, and the Hardy boys could hear her vigorously disputing the amount of the fare. This was a matter of principle with Aunt Gertrude, who always argued with taxi drivers as a matter of course, it being her firm conviction that they were unanimously in a conspiracy to overcharge her and defraud her at all times. With Lavinia under one arm and a huge umbrella under the other, Aunt Gertrude withered the taxicab driver with a fiery denunciation, and when he helplessly pointed to the meter and declared that figures did not lie, she dropped both cat and umbrella, rummaged about in the manifold recesses of her clothing for a very small purse, produced the exact amount of the fare in silver, counted it out, and handed it to the man with the air of one giving alms. "And just for your impudence, you shan't have a tip," she announced. "Carry my bags up to the house." The driver gazed sadly at the silver in his hand, pocketed it, and clambered back into the car. "Carry 'em up yourself," he advised, slamming the door. The taxi roared away down the street. Frank chuckled. "That's one on Aunt Gertrude." But Aunt Gertrude had no intention of carrying the bags up to the house. Suddenly she glared up at the window from which the two boys had been watching the scene. "You two boys up there," she shouted. "I see you. Don't think I can't see you. Come down here and carry up my bags. Hustle now." They hustled. End of chapter 6.